Good morning, everyone. Hello, happy Friday. Let me know if you can hear me okay.
Morning, Professor.
Hello, good morning, Jess.
Good morning, teacher.
Hello.
Great. It's good to see everybody. We'll get started here in just a few minutes, and I'm going to pull up a couple more pages here as we begin today's session. If anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in. We'll start here in a few minutes, but we'll have some time here to get started. If anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free to jump right in. How are you guys feeling about the process so far? How do you usually this time of the semester, it can be a little bit stressful, especially trying to finish up the literature review. Hopefully you're getting close to finishing. Today is the deadline. I'm going to give everyone all day today to submit or to complete your draft. You don't have to send me anything. You don't need to let me know that you finished. All you need to do is complete it in the shared Word Online document that we've been using all semester. Okay, so try to finish by today, sometime today. Tomorrow in the morning, I'm going to wake up and download all of your Word documents, and then I'll start looking at each one, giving you some feedback on your paper. Anybody have any questions or comments so far this semester? Feel free to jump right in. I'm going to share my screen, guys. Here is our schedule for this semester. Just to review, we looked at this schedule, I think, the first day of class. I think it's worth looking at again at this point. We are finishing Unit 1 this week, and our main goal for Unit 1 is to complete our literature review. Next week, on Monday, we start Unit 2. Okay, so March 8th, we're going to begin looking at our instrument design. We're going to start talking about our data collection. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. We're going to get into some of the specifics to that. And then we'll be starting our data collection. Now, this is an approximate schedule in the sense that we may not all follow exactly the same process. First, the design of the instruments, and then the data collection. In some cases, some of you may start with the data collection, then design some instruments, and then do some other data collection, and then design some other instruments. So there's going to be some flexibility depending on your research objectives. And this is something that we're going to be talking about one-on-one in our tutoring sessions, right? So that each one of you is using the appropriate process for collecting your data. Okay, so if you're doing something slightly different than some of your classmates, if you're asking yourself, well, why am I collecting data now when my classmate is designing his or her instrument? Okay, it's going to depend on your research objectives. It's going to depend on your research design. And again, these are things that we're going to talk about one-on-one, since each of you, right, might have a slightly different focus in terms of your research objective and in terms of possibly the research design. Okay, so basically look at Unit 2 by by thinking collectively, we're going to be collecting our data, we're going to be designing our instruments, we're going to be applying our instruments. Okay, we're going to, even to a degree, start to analyze part of the data depending on what we're looking at. Okay, so we're going to start on Monday, March 8th with Unit 2, and that's going to take us all the way up to April 16th. All right, so we're going to have 6 weeks, the following 6 weeks, dedicated towards collecting our data, using or designing our instruments. And I usually suggest that we'll probably have 3 to 4 weeks to collect the data. Even though we have 6 weeks here, it usually takes a week or two for the design of certain instruments. There's some other things that come up. If you look here, we have a holiday. We have Easter holiday the week of April 5th, I think. I'm looking at this. No, March 29th through April 4th. Okay, so we have some holidays here that we also have to deal with, especially in terms of the classes that we're going to be observing. So usually this week of Easter holiday, and many times it's a wash, as they say. It's usually non-productive, right? Because usually schools will have some functions going on, some parties going on, and usually little, if anything, happens during that week. Now, maybe it might be different being an online class. I'm not sure, but in the past, that's how it's usually worked out. So in terms of collecting the data, usually we can't count on that week, okay? So this unit, more than any, really depends on how you schedule your time, all right? And so one of the things I want to talk about today is developing a schedule, and I'm going to go into Microsoft Teams. If you guys are online with your laptop, I think it's going to be easier to access some of the files that I'm going to talk about here today. If you're on your phone, you might want to go back to this recording later and do some of the things that we're talking about in terms of accessing certain files. But if you're on your desktop computer, if you can go into your Microsoft Teams under Files, you'll notice that I opened up a new folder and I pinned it along the top, so it should be located at the top of your screen next to Thesis Writers. We're going to continue working in this folder with your particular Word document all semester. That's going to continue as normal. But this other file now, this is going to be related to what we do for this unit, Unit 2. So I'm going to ask everyone to maintain a schedule for collecting your data. So this schedule, what I'm going to ask is that you go into this and choose any one of these Excel files. They're all the same. It's basically a template. Let's take a look at it. And it's pretty simple. It has basically each week as a row. Okay, so these are the weeks. We have 6 weeks for Unit 2, and we have 6 weeks here located here in column A. And then we have Monday through Friday. I guess I should have added Saturday. Maybe there's something going on Saturday. You can easily insert a Saturday column if you need to. Right-click and insert a column to the right and add Saturday. But here the idea is to add information. This should be text, should be able to wrap it. Okay, so if you can type in what you're doing for that particular day. Now, this might relate to when you're going to apply certain instruments. This could also be just what you're working on. Maybe you're designing an instrument. Maybe you're designing a questionnaire. Maybe you're reviewing a questionnaire. Maybe you need to have an interview with a teacher a certain day. The idea with the schedule is that you maintain the schedule throughout Unit 2. If you know you're going to schedule an interview next Tuesday or next Thursday, right? In fact, you could easily project, let's say that you want to interview the teacher at the end of each week, and you know you're going to start your data collection, let's say on March 22nd, the week of March 22nd. You could say, okay, I'm going to put in here, I'm going to, interview the teacher on Friday, each Friday of each of the 3 weeks that I'm going to collect the data, as an example. And if you know that going into the first week, well, then you can go ahead and project and put that information here. Of course, if something changes, you can modify this. The idea is that you can see at a glance more or less what you're going to do, what you're doing currently, and of course, leaving the information there to see what you've done in the past. Okay, so this does two things. I think it helps you plan and schedule your time accordingly. And it also, since I also have access to it, I can also see and make some suggestions if necessary, looking at how you're planning your time. Unit 2 is all about how you're planning your time. More than any other unit, more than any other part of the process, right? This Unit 2 is a lot different than Unit 1. Unit 1, it's pretty much all up to you, right? It's how much time you put into it, how you dedicate your time. I know that sometimes technology interferes, but for the most part, it's really up to you and how much time you spend. Unit 2 is a little bit different because we're depending on our participants. And so we could plan very well and have everything lined out, and things could still go wrong. I hope they don't, right? But they could. So we really have to plan and almost anticipate what could possibly, go wrong. Am I planning enough time just in case, right? Maybe I plan all of my data collection and maybe I try to finish by, April 10th, for example, so that I have one more week just in case. If I need one more interview, if I need one more focus group with my participants, I'm going to plan accordingly. All right, so really try to use the schedule, keep it up to date as often as possible so that you're planning accordingly, you're planning your time well, and you're really anticipating some of these challenges that could come up, again, because we're dependent on other people. And we're dependent on theirs. And sometimes even the teachers, it's outside of their control. Maybe the administrators schedule a last-minute meeting. Something comes up, and it might interfere with your data collection process. So this is a schedule that I'm going to ask everyone to maintain during Unit 2. This is the first place that I'm going to check when we meet in our one-to-one tutoring sessions. This is the first place. I'll look at this and I'll ask questions like, okay, what are you currently working on? All right. What are you planning for this week and next week and so on, right? As we get into our discussions about the instruments, we'll also look at the schedule together to make the best decisions based on your research objective. All right, so this is a file I'm going to ask everyone to complete and maintain this schedule. Again, you can upload this, or actually you can access this file going under Files under Microsoft Teams. And the folder is called Data Collection Schedules. If you're online right now and you've got access, if you have a way to access it on a desktop computer, feel free to go in and go ahead and, if you want to go ahead and change one of these files, add your name. I'm going to ask everyone to add your complete name to the file. You can replace this text. So if you select here and click rename, just remove all of this. You don't need to keep any of this text and just put your full name, first and last name, as the name of the file, and that's all you need to do. Alrighty. Any questions at this point? Any questions, guys, so far? So far, so good? All right, I'll be trying to check your comments on my phone here. If you guys post any questions, if I miss any of the questions, again, feel free to jump right in. You can interrupt, ask questions, make comments. Okay, I've got some things I want to share with you, but I also want to hear from you. You know, how things are going, your questions that you have, of course. Okay, so again, please feel free to jump right in. Don't be shy. All right, my friends. I'm going to open up a page in Notion, and this page is dedicated to basically everything that I want to share with you this morning. And I shared this link in our chat in Microsoft Teams. Okay, so again, if it helps to open up this page as we're discussing it, I'm also sharing my screen, of course, so you can look at that. But again, there's going to be some things that I'm going to suggest that you do to get really the most out of today's session. Okay, one is accessing and using the schedule that I just shared with you, the Excel spreadsheet in Microsoft Teams. That's one. The next is to copy and paste some of the questions here that I want to share with you this morning into your own personal page in the Thesis Seminar roster spring page, spring 2021. And if you're accessing this page, you can open this up. As you know, this is our roster page. This is our page where all of you should have your own space, your own page. And so one of the things I would suggest that you do today, if you're watching this video, you can do it later, but I would copy these questions that we're going to share, that we're going to discuss this morning. Remember to copy. It's very simple. If you click the Shift key and move your cursor over, you can select these questions, just like I'm doing now. And you can copy these. If you right click, you can copy these over to your page. Or if you hit Control C, you can actually copy and paste these sections. Now, because these are toggles, there's an arrow here. We've got additional content within each of these questions and many of the questions. So again, if you just copy the questions themselves, as I'm doing here, it will copy all of that information. If it's easier, you can just copy the whole page, right? Control C and go to your page, and you can paste it anywhere you want, towards the bottom if you wish, right, to have these questions, okay? Because some of these questions, in fact, all of these questions, you need to have your own answers to them, right? And this is going to help you think about what we need to accomplish in Unit 2 when it comes to collecting your data. All right, so the first thing we'll look at is, you might be asking how to, well, okay, let me back up, sorry. Just a reminder to submit your literature review, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's class. You don't have to send me anything. You don't have to send an attachment. Please don't send any attachments. It's not necessary to tell me that you finished. I'm going to assume that everyone's going to finish, and today is the deadline. So please try to update and complete your literature review in the shared Word Online document. Tomorrow in the morning, Saturday, I will wake up, I will turn on my computer, I will go in and download all of your Word documents, and we'll begin the process of giving each of you feedback, okay? So please try to finish the literature review first and foremost. Okay. Now, the methods section. One of the first questions you should ask yourself, and you might think that I sound like a broken record, but the question is, what is your thesis statement? And you're probably thinking, oh, not again. Yes, again. Thesis statement. What is my thesis statement? Right? I've been asking you, we've been talking about your thesis statement almost every day during our tutoring sessions throughout Unit 1 as it relates to your theory. But guess what? Our thesis statement also relates to our own particular study. So think about it. What is your thesis statement? Bring it over from what you've developed in your literature review. You can click the down arrow and just write it out. It's a good exercise to remind yourself. What is the main idea? What's my thesis? What's the main idea of my entire research? Not just the theory, but also my own research that I'm going to collect data on and analyze myself and report. So here we'll need to include our thesis statement and obviously our research questions. So we need to think about our research questions, the exact same research questions that we include at the final paragraph in our transitional paragraph in our theory. Those are our research questions, obviously, too, that we're going to seek to answer. When you're doing research, it's very simple. You ask a question and you try to answer it. You try to answer it in terms of what the theory, what the other experts say, what other researchers have said about those particular questions, and you're going to also set out to answer those same questions, very specific to the participants that you chose. And even if you have the same research questions as someone else, because your context is different, because your participants are unique in some way, you're adding to the literature because you're gaining more, or I should say you're getting a better understanding of those same questions. So it's not copying. You know, we think that sometimes students might think that it's a bad thing to copy someone else. And if you're talking about plagiarism, yes, we don't want to copy someone else's ideas and say that they're our own ideas when they're not. But when you're replicating a study, this is common practice. In fact, this is recommended in most cases, is we want to replicate a study that someone else did because we're going to add to the understanding about those questions because our participants are unique. They're different. So we're going to learn more about those same questions that have been asked maybe multiple times in other studies. Okay, so that's why using other instruments, other procedures, other research questions, right? I am almost always recommending that we do that. And we're also going to cite it in our method section. We're going to say, this particular questionnaire is coming from someone else. So we'll have a citation to support that. But that's okay. This is what we want to try to do. So these research questions, again, we have our own research questions, and maybe these research questions you borrowed from another research, another study, but we're going to learn more about those by researching our own participants. So here we can add our research questions, okay? Our research questions is really the bridge between the theory and our own research, right? We don't want to include anything in our theory that goes beyond the scope of our own study. We don't want to include anything in our theory that we don't look for, that we don't discuss, that we don't consider when we're analyzing our own data. Now, you might be asking, in fact, some students have asked me, what happens if I ask, in my research questions, I'm looking for students who are using what's up in the class, and I start to observe and they don't They don't do it. They don't use that thing, or they don't maybe use a strategy that I included in my theory. That's okay. Number one, that's okay if you analyze it and you include it in your analysis and you report on it. You can say, okay, this teacher didn't use this particular strategy. And then you're going to make a judgment. You're going to say that was a good thing or that was a bad thing. So that's fine. What you don't want to do is include a list of all these strategies, but only look or consider half of those in your own study and not even mention it, not even look for some of the other strategies. That's what we want to avoid. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second is, if you're in a situation where your participants are not giving you enough information to properly answer your research questions, then we need to decide, we as in you and I, we need to decide collectively if you need to do an intervention. An intervention is where you now might make suggestions. You might talk to the teacher and work with her very closely to see, if she can try something new. Maybe do something differently in the classroom in order to give you the information that you need to answer your research questions. Okay, that's going to be an intervention, and we only want to do an intervention if as a last resort. This is like the last thing we would consider if the teacher's not already doing something in her practice that is helping us answer our research questions. So I think now's a good time to stress the importance of us working together and us making decisions about how you're going to collect the data. Please don't take or make decisions about collecting the data until we have had at least one conversation about it, okay? I want to make sure that you receive some feedback before you make any decisions. Ultimately, it's your decision, right? And I want to help you in doing, whatever, I'll try to help you however I can. But if you're not sure exactly how all of the data collection is going to happen, right? We don't want to make a mistake in collecting our data or asking a particular question when we should have waited maybe and done something else first. And so please make sure that we've had at least a conversation, whether it's in our tutoring session or we schedule something outside of your tutoring session, or whether you post a question in Microsoft Word and I respond, right? It doesn't have to be in the tutoring session, but I want to make sure that you kind of see the big picture before you before you get into the specifics of collecting your data. All right, so your research questions, make sure that your observations, make sure that everything that you are that you're using, your instruments, help you answer your research questions. That's the key. All right, so your thesis statement or research questions are going to relate to our study, of course, and then the next question. When will your method section be due? All right, before we get into the specifics, okay? So our method section consists of approximately 500 words. There's not a lot of words that we need to include in this section. It's the smallest section, right, of our thesis paper. But it requires a lot of activity, a lot of work, and a lot of interactions with your participants in order to get those very important 500 words. All right, so this section, the second section of your paper, is going to be due April 16th. Your method section is going to be due April 16th. The actual words in your shared Word Online document. All right, so I'm really not looking closely at the development of your text, and I probably won't until the very end, because most of our conversations are going to be around your data collection, your instruments, your procedures, your data analysis, and the things that you're doing practically in answering your research questions. That's going to be most of our discussions, and most of the things I'll be checking will be more in your schedule than in your Word document. But I want to make it clear that your text, okay, for the method section will be due April 16th. This is going to include the following main sections: your participants, your instruments, and your procedure and data analysis. Okay, so here we have our participants. Now, sometimes we call our participant section our demographics. What are our demographics? Okay, so include in this section information about your participants. This is where you're going to describe your participants. Who are they? Right? What level are they? How old are they? Okay, you're going to include any type of information that's relevant to your study, that's relevant to answering your research questions. Here we're going to describe them. Only include relevant information necessary to address your research questions. So let me give you an example. If age has nothing to do with the purpose of your study, right, it's not going to make much sense to ask their age in a questionnaire. The only reason you would ask for their age is if age was related to your research questions, or you needed to analyze the ages of your groups, right, because it was relevant to your research questions. Okay, so if it's not relevant, then don't include asking about their age. Depending on the purpose of your research, possible demographic information might include the following. It could include their age, their academic level, the grade level, enrolled courses, TOEFL scores, nationality, learning disabilities, right, etc. Okay, these are examples. This doesn't mean that you include all of these, but these are possible things that you could describe about your participants in this section. And again, we only want to include information that's relevant, that is important, that is necessary in answering our research questions. Sometimes we call this information independent variables if we're thinking about a quantitative study. Okay, if you've heard that term, it's related as well. Most of you, though, are doing a qualitative study. Okay, you're going to be relying on information in text form, in a descriptive type of study in most of your cases. Okay, so this particular section, okay, we're going to include one paragraph that describes our participants. Now, this is different than what I talked with some of you about last unit, or the first unit 1, where I suggested to avoid only having one paragraph in any one section. And that's true. We don't want to we want to have at least 2 paragraphs if we have a heading of any kind in the theory and in the results in the discussion section. But in the method section, it's a little bit different. Here, it's okay to have one paragraph. In fact, you should only have one paragraph in your participants section. You should only have one paragraph for your instruments section. And you should only have one paragraph for your procedure and data analysis. Okay, so we'll basically have 3 paragraphs in this section called the method, and the method section will have 500 words. All right, so here we have our participants. Ask yourself, who are your participants? Who will likely provide you the information you need to answer your research questions? And there's a reason why I brought this up at the beginning of the semester, because I wanted all of you to start early in looking for your participants. Okay, so this question is not new, right? This is something we've been talking about from the very beginning. Who are your possible participants? How will they likely provide you the information that you need, right, to answer your research questions? But keep thinking about that. This is still the most important question, because if they're not giving you what you need, then you need to do an intervention. If there's no way to do an intervention, right, if the teacher just does not have the disposition or the attitude, the willingness to to try something differently, and there are many teachers like that. There might be some other teachers that would love to help you, but they're not able to because of the school policy. So it's out of their hands, but they can't do the thing that you want them to do. All right? These are all very important questions that you need to ask yourself as the researcher. To say, okay, are these participants going to help me? Can they help me? And if not, then I need to look elsewhere. And if you're still in that situation, then you need to look elsewhere and try to find some other participants, as soon as possible. Okay. Hopefully, all of you are comfortable with the participants that you've chosen, and you feel that it's likely that they will give you what you need. Okay. What special permissions will you need? Okay. Same questions we've been talking about earlier. Many of you have sent me requests for signing your permissions. And so as you get into the study, as you start to collect your data, be open. Maybe at the last minute, they may request or ask that they sign something or that you sign something. So just make sure that you're getting the permissions if needed. All right, so your participants, all of this information, this is what you're going to include in this first paragraph in the method section. The instruments, again, we're going to develop one paragraph. Instruments refer to anything that is used to obtain information. Okay, so for example, you might have surveys, questionnaires. Be careful with the pronunciation of the word questionnaires. 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 Practice saying that if pronunciation is a thing. Pronunciation of the word questionnaires. Be careful with that. Checklists. Observation sheets. Rubrics. These are all possible instruments that you might be using. Do you need to use all of these? No, probably not. Which ones do you need to use? Well, it's going to depend on what kind of information you need to get. These are things we're going to talk about on a one-to-one basis. This is not one size fits all. This is not me saying, okay, everybody should use checklists. It's all going to depend on each of your situations, each of your research objectives. So again, I want you to notice how your classmates are doing their research and share each other's stories about how you're doing with your research, but realize that you might be doing something differently than your classmates based on the specifics of your research. And that's okay. That's fact. That's normal. Okay, notice that observations are not instruments. All right, so sometimes students will confuse the word instruments with observations. Observations is the act of observing. It's an act. It's a behavior. It's something that you're going to do. You're going to observe. You're going to watch. You're going to listen to your participants. Maybe in a classroom situation. In most cases, those are called observations. The instruments you might use an instrument to observe. For example, you might have an observation sheet. So that would be considered an instrument, but not the word just observation. You're encouraged to use instruments from other studies. Okay, so always try to use or modify an instrument from another study for the purposes of your own study. That's always good practice. Okay, and whether exactly the same or modified of your own, it's okay. If you design one yourself, then we probably will need to pilot it. That means we'll need to apply it to a group of students for them to kind of a practice using the instrument to see if there are any problems using it. But if you are using an instrument from another study, then most of the time we don't need to pilot those instruments because they've already been used. They've already been applied in a research setting. So that gives us the confidence that that is a valid and useful instrument. All right. So we have here, will you need to interview your participants? All right. And these questions, as you're copying and pasting these questions over to your own space, Okay, if maybe you don't know the answer right now today, but these are questions as you are thinking about the questions and you're answering these questions. I think it's good practice to include these in your space. Will you be needing interviews? All right, and if so, how many interviews? How many participants? Right? Are you going to interview your teachers, for example, before the class or after the class, or both? Are you going to interview the participant once a week, twice a week, at the beginning of the intervention, at the end of the intervention, or even during the intervention? Like maybe you observe a class, interview, observe a class, interview. Now, here's an important thing to consider, and I think I talk about this later, but this is a good time to bring it up. Your participants are doing you a favor. Okay, we're not doing them a favor, okay? Usually. They're doing us a favor in that they have agreed to help you. They've agreed to allow you to observe their classes. They are spending the time, the extra time required to offer interviews or to complete a survey. They're doing you a favor. So please keep that in mind, that they are helping you with your study. And when we're thinking about our interviews, when we're thinking about any aspect of collecting our data, okay, we don't want to become, we don't want to interfere. We don't want to, make this more challenging than it has to be for the participants. All right. So, it would be great probably to have an interview after every class. You observe, 5 classes for 3 weeks, 15 classes, 15 interviews. Yeah, that would be wonderful, probably, right? To have all of those interviews for you, the researcher. But for them, the participant, the teacher, the busy teacher, the stressed out teacher, right? To have all those interviews probably will cause more stress for him or for her. So try to keep that in mind. Put yourself into their shoes. Show a level of gratitude when you interact with your participants, and try to be flexible and understand that, yes, you need as much information as you can possibly get, but also we need to respect the fact that these teachers are teaching probably in a new situation online, and there's a stress level going on, and yeah. So my point here is, yes, we need to make careful decisions about, yes, how much do I need? How many interviews do I need to answer my research questions? But I also need to respect the efforts of my participants and not be too much of an inconvenience, right, for them. So, interviews. Will you be needing interviews? Will you be needing focus groups? Now, the difference between a focus group and an interview. An interview is a one-on-one conversation. Now, an interview can be verbally, like what we normally think, talking back and forth, whether it's online or face-to-face, but you're having a conversation, you're asking questions, and they are answering the questions, okay? That's one example. It could also be a written interview. A written interview is you ask the questions, you send it, and they reply. Now, you might be saying, well, which one is better? Well, it depends. Where there are some limitations when you do a written interview because, well, there's no opportunity to follow up with a question. So following up with questions, we call this a semi-structured interview because maybe we have certain questions that we have prepared. We know, kind of what we're going to ask, but we don't know exactly how the participant, the teacher, is going to respond. And so in the moment when we are talking back and forth, it's quite easy to come up with some follow-up questions. And you start to follow up more and more based on what the teacher's telling you, and you end up getting a lot of really good information. But that's not possible usually with a written interview because, well, it's a written exchange. And so you send a written document and they just answer the questions. That's called a structured interview, a structured written interview. You could do also a structured interview speaking with someone. But typically, structured interviews are not quite as good as semi-structured. So we really want to try to stick with semi-structured interviews if at all possible, only because it allows us to get more descriptive information through a conversation. Okay, a semi-structured interview is more of a conversation. You do have some questions, right, that you have prepared that you want to ask, but it should evolve through a conversation, right, where you follow up with additional questions and maybe you make some comments, and you want to make the participant, the teacher, as comfortable as possible. You don't want them to think that they're being interrogated with a big spotlight on their face and you're asking a question, right? Sometimes they could, they might get nervous, and maybe they don't end up sharing the information as they would if it were more conversational. So interviews. Instruments. What instruments will you need? Okay, so we talked about a few examples: surveys, questionnaires. The instruments that you use should facilitate the data collection process. All right, so there might be some instruments that are very specific to your study, right, that we'll need to look at. But think of instruments as simply anything that helps you collect the data. It might be a checklist. If you're observing a class and you're looking for certain things, maybe you have a instrument that helps you look for certain things in your observations. All right, so instruments, that's going to be our second section. Our third section, procedure and data analysis. Now, the procedure section includes the process that you're going to follow to collect and analyze your data. Now, this relates very much to the schedule that I shared with you earlier, this data collection schedule. All right, so your procedure is really going to be coming directly from your schedule. In fact, if you do this schedule well that I'm sharing with you, if you complete this and keep it maintained very well, it's going to be so much easier to take this information, this schedule, in an Excel spreadsheet and just convert it into a paragraph. All right? You don't have to remember, okay, what did I do on week 1 of Unit 2? What did I do on March 15th on Wednesday? I don't remember. Keep up the schedule, right? It will make it so much easier. In fact, from just as a writing standpoint, the method section, I think, is the easiest, okay, in terms of just writing text. If you keep up your schedule, and of course, you're taking the necessary steps to address your participants, your instruments, and your procedure. In a qualitative study, again, most of you are doing qualitative work. Okay, most of you are doing qualitative studies that require a description. You're describing something or explaining something, or both. Okay, so think of your study as you're exploring in many cases. In many cases, you're describing something, and in many cases, you're exploring, you're explaining something, maybe why something is happening. All right, so in qualitative studies, you will also need to transcribe texts, and you will need to code. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more later, more specifically about data analysis. We're going to have another whole group session on the 16th, just before we go on break, where I'm going to, much like what we're doing now, and I'm going to dedicate that day only to talking about data analysis, okay? But I just want to mention now that you will need to be transcribing text. So this is why it's important that when you observe classes that you have permission to record. The only way to transcribe and to code is to record your observations, is to record your interviews. You want to record everything. Now, you might decide, you might ask, do I need a video or an audio? Well, it depends, right? Depends on what you need. If you just need an interview and you just are trying to get answers to certain questions, then probably just an audio recording using your phone or computer or whatever is fine. Maybe you don't need the video. But if you're observing a classroom situation where you're looking at, let's say, verbal, nonverbal communication or a reaction, you're looking for certain behaviors in students. Do they look nervous? Are they looking at each other? How are they interacting visually, right? What kind of behavior requires the visual aspect of it? Well, then in those cases, you're going to need a video. So you need to decide, all right, do I need an audio video recording? Do I have permission? Do I need to sign something? Would it help them if I sign something as the researcher to give them more confidence that all the information that I'm going to collect is going to remain confidential? And I'm only going to use it for the purposes of my study. And I'm also going to destroy it when I have completed the course, after the fact. All right, so recordings, we need that because you're going to need to transcribe, you're going to need to code, and it's impossible to transcribe and it's impossible to code, right, which is part of the data analysis for qualitative study. It's impossible to do that if you don't have the recordings. Okay, to get the recordings, you may need permission. If you're not sure, ask, offer even. I would offer just as a common, just as to show them some respect, I would offer everyone, all my participants, I'm willing to sign a permission, a informed consent form or permission to assure that I will respect your privacy. I will take these steps to respect your confidentiality. So you might ask, well, how will you record your observations? Okay, these are questions you need to ask. Maybe these are questions we need to discuss. Okay, if you're not sure, but these are certainly questions that you need to have an answer to. How will I record my observations? Will it be on my computer? Will it be on my phone? Some other way? And obviously, it's going to depend on if your classes are face-to-face or online. Okay, maybe the teachers themselves are recording the classes and they're going to offer you those recordings. Okay, but you need to have an answer. You need to know how you're going to obtain these recordings. Well, you need to do a focus group. This is related, I think, more towards the... well, it's related to instruments as well. But you need to do a focus group, okay? And what will be the process that you follow to collect your data? These are all relevant questions that relate to the procedure. The procedure is simply how you're going to collect the data. Data analysis we'll talk about later. In all three sections, participants, instruments, and procedure, the purpose of the method section is to give enough information to the reader. If they wanted to replicate their study, what would they need to know? They need to know what you include in the method section. So just as maybe in some of your cases you're replicating other studies or you're taking ideas from other studies, you got that information from their method section. So when you develop your own method section, keep that in mind. What do I need to share with the reader so they could replicate? They could basically apply my study to their own participants. Try to keep that in mind when you're describing your participants, you're describing your instruments, and you're explaining or laying out the procedure of your study. The last thing I'll mention is that the instruments we will include at the end of your document as appendices. So we'll have separate appendices, one for each one. So if you have like two instruments, you'll have appendices at the end of your document after your references that will have your instruments. We're going to include all of your instruments in your thesis paper. We'll talk more about that later and individually, more specifically about how to do that. All right, my friends. Hasta ahí, vamos bien, vamos mal, vamos bien mal. ¿Cómo andamos? Questions, comments at this point? Go ahead. Diana, if you have a question, jump right in or comment.
We're going to just include the instruments, right? Not the instruments, the results with the instruments completed. Just the instruments.
Okay, that's a good question. The instruments, when I say that we're going to include our instruments at the end of your document as appendices, what I'm referring to is just the document, just the instrument itself, okay? So it'll be blank. It won't have any information. It'll just be the instrument itself. Now, what Diana's asking about also, I think, is what's called field notes. Field notes is basically any data, any information that you collect. So if you apply, let's say, 20 instruments to 20 teachers and you get all 20 instruments back completed, those are now called field notes. All right, that's information that you're going to use to analyze later on. Okay, it could be questionnaires, could be anything, could be homework, it could be notes to yourself. Those are all different examples of field notes. So you might be asking, well, do I need to include my field notes in my thesis paper? And the answer is no, but with a caveat. No, you don't include field notes in the paper, but you need to keep your field notes. All right. And I would keep your field notes until well after you've completed the course. You've got your grade. There are no questions about your grade. You're happy with that. And when you start to delete, your information, okay, your field notes might be something that you delete. You can decide what, you don't need to necessarily keep those field notes. But the field notes is something that I usually don't require. I'm not going to tell everyone, I need all of your field notes. The only time I will ask you about your field notes is as it relates to questions and things that we're talking about as it relates to maybe your data analysis or your data collection. I may say, well, let's look, can you show me the questionnaires that you applied to your teachers? And I only ask for those field notes to answer a question that comes up in our conversations. So find a system. Be very careful keeping your field notes, organizing your field notes, because that's how you're going to analyze your data. But no, you don't need to include your field notes in the paper itself. Now, when I talk about the data analysis, there's going to be a small exception to that. We'll talk about it later. I'll ask for one example of your coding, but I don't want to get into that right now, because right now our main focus is for us to understand the main sections of the method section and how we're going to start in what we're going to start thinking about starting next week. Okay. So Diana, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. No, thank you for asking that question. That was a good question. Any other questions? I know this session is going to be a little bit long. I know I'm talking a lot. I'm trying to get out all this information that needs to be said. And with the understanding that the recording hopefully is going to be completed and you'll have access to our class today. If you need to go back and review something that we're talking about. But again, these are things we're going to talk about very specific to your study. Okay, some things will be similar. If you're comparing yourself with the research of your classmates, some of it will be different. all of us will have 3 sections in our method section. We're all going to call it a method. That's going to be our level 1 heading. And we're all going to have 3 level 2 headings for our method section. One called participants, one called instruments, and one called procedure and data analysis. These are our level 2 main sections, and we're going to have a paragraph in each of those 3. So all of our papers will look the same in that respect. Okay, we're all going to have the same subheadings. We're all going to have the same level 1 heading, and so on. Alrighty. I included this at the end. How will you demonstrate respect to your participants for helping you in your study? Again, this is really important. Really, especially at this time where I know that teachers are going to be, there's going to be a level of stress maybe this semester, unfortunately, that maybe didn't exist in the past, perhaps. So just be mindful of that. Again, be respectful of their time and their efforts. I think it's helpful to show a level of gratitude. Try to be flexible it's they're not entitled. They don't have to help us. They're being generous with their time. So just keep that in mind. And I think a lot of times the way that we, treat others can go a long way in terms of, what they're willing to do. Okay. So just try to keep that in mind as you're collecting your data. All right. So this is the methods section, more or less. A couple of questions regarding research design. As I mentioned before, most of us are going to be doing a qualitative research study. Some of you may be doing a mixed methods. And now mixed methods, all right, I'm going to put in here, and I'll probably add a little bit more information to this page a little bit later. But some of you who are doing a mixed methods, all right, if we're doing a quantitative study, you might be doing something related to descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics is very similar to what you probably did in your research class. Investigación Educativa, I think, is the name of the class. I don't know if you had a class with Matias, but you guys have, I think, a class where you talk generally about descriptive statistics. These are descriptive statistics relates to the mean, like averages, mode, and so on. Okay, where you're basically providing maybe bar charts or pie charts to show you're describing percentages. So X amount of percentages of this and so on. And so these are descriptive statistics that might be included in some of your studies. Some of you that have chosen a certain focus that requires these types of analysis, this would be a possibility. We're probably not going to be doing anything with inferential statistics, okay? So most of you are going to be doing a qualitative study and maybe in some cases a quantitative that relates to descriptive statistics. One of the key points doing qualitative research is this concept of triangulation. Triangulation, now what does that mean? Triangulation, tri meaning 3, all right, basically means that when you're collecting data, when you're trying to observe any phenomena, we need to try to have 3 different sources of information that support the thing that you're looking at. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are looking at communicative strategies. That's the thing that you're analyzing. Communicative strategies, how students are using communicative strategies when they're conversing, when they're talking with a classmate back and forth. All right, so one source of information is you observing, you as the researcher observing in real time those strategies. Are the students using communicative strategies? Well, you're observing, yes or no, and how are they doing it? But it's through your senses. You're observing, you're visually, you're listening as well. Okay, so anything that you can observe, that's going to be one source of information. But that's not the only source of information. If we think about communicative strategies, you might say, well, I'm going to ask the students about how they planned, what they thought about, planned in terms of the activity, the speaking activity. I'm going to ask them what they were thinking about maybe in the moment of conversing with their classmates. I might ask the students how they felt just about the conversation. Did they like it? Did they not like it? But you're getting information from the student about the conversation that they had, where they used or did not use communicative strategies. That's another source of information. So now we have two sources. We have your observation, and we have now the comments, the feelings, the beliefs of the student. So we have two sources. What's a third source? A possibility. The teacher. You could ask the teacher, okay, I saw that you were observing and interacting with this particular student, or these two students who were conversing using communicative strategies. And then you ask for the teacher's perspective, opinion, reflection about that conversation. So now you have not only your observation, the student's observation or feelings about using those communicative strategies, but also the teacher's feelings about those particular strategies. And your conversations with the teacher could also include just general teaching techniques that relate to the promotion of communicative strategies. But you're getting, in that example, 3 sources of information. Think of it as a teacher. When you're observing and you're evaluating your students and you're giving students their grades, are you relying on one piece of information? Imagine that. Imagine if you relied on one piece of information to give a grade to a student, and the only type of information that you're going to require is an exam. So whatever they get on the exam, that's their final grade. All right. So we typically don't want to do that as teachers. Maybe we apply some exams, but we also observe. Maybe we take into consideration their homework. Maybe we look at how they progressed in their activities that they did, and we give them credit for certain types of, things that they have achieved in that progression. But we take other sources of information to give their final grade, because we know that students are complex, and some students may do well in tests while others may not, and etc. Right? We take into consideration not only their speaking skills, but their writing skills and their reading skills, right? So there are all kinds of different sources of information that we rely on when we grade and evaluate a student's proficiency level of English. This is the same idea when we're doing research. We don't want to rely only on your observations. We don't want to rely only on teacher beliefs. Okay? We don't only want to rely on what the students feel, because there's more to it. All right? We want to know, well, what did you see? Okay, they felt like that. The teacher thought like this, and you observed this. Okay, now what does this mean? What does all this mean? Taking into consideration all 3 data sources. So when you're collecting data, when you're analyzing anything, never rely on one piece of information. Here's the thing. If you only have one piece of information that supports the thing that you're analyzing, it's better not to use it. You might say, oh, I want to talk, the teacher shared with me some great information about teacher beliefs about this one thing. Well, then I'll ask, well, did you observe that thing? No, I didn't observe it. Well, did you ask the students about how they felt about that thing? No, I didn't. I just know what the teacher told me. Well, then that's not enough. And this happens a lot when teachers might say, well, last year, I did this or I did that, and it used to be like that, and they start to share a lot of information in the past. And okay, maybe that's interesting, but since you didn't observe it, since there's really no way to collect additional information about that past experience, whether it's through students or administrators or other teachers, you're only going by what they told you. And you're going to feel like, wow, I can't talk about that because they told me something awesome. It was so insightful and deep and all of this and that. But if we didn't observe it, right, then it's best in most cases not to use it. One of the things that the examiners might ask you, right, they'll say, well, okay, the teacher told you that, but what did you observe, right? You don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to, justify someone's beliefs when there's nothing else to back it up. All right, so triangulation. For qualitative research, this is big, right? This is something we really need to respect when we're doing really good qualitative research, because for you to do an interpretation, which is at the end of the day, this is what you're going to set out to do. You're going to collect data, and then you're going to say, is it good? Is it bad? What does it mean? What do you think? How does this compare to the research, your theory? Right? What are your recommendations? That's where all of this is going. And so when you're collecting the data, always keep this in mind. Am I triangulating as best I can? Now, there may be cases, I want to be careful when I say this, there may be cases where 2 pieces of information may be enough. Okay? But 3 is best. Right? 3 is best. And and this is something we'll talk specifically about. I will try to clarify, what I mean by this in terms of data sources, right? To help you, relate it directly to what you're doing in your own study. But I just want to stress from the very beginning, when you're thinking about your participants, when you're thinking about not just the teachers, but the groups and the students, think about, am I getting enough to answer my questions? Thinking of ways to triangulate the information to offer the best answers to those questions, especially for qualitative. Again, the whole idea of triangulation relates only to qualitative research, okay, and mixed methods where qualitative research is part of it. Quantitative is a little bit different, okay, and we'll mainly statistics will be our main focus there. The last thing I want to talk about as it relates to research design is the unit of analysis. Many of us have had these discussions where maybe I've asked you, well, what do you plan to compare? And maybe I should even write this here underneath as another in fact, I did. What will you compare and contrast? Okay, so that's my question to you right now. Think about, what are you going to compare and contrast? Are you going to have one teacher with 2 or 3 groups and you compare and contrast those 2 or 3 groups? Maybe those groups are similar and maybe they're unique in different ways. What are you going to compare and contrast? Maybe you want to look at 2 different teachers and you want to look at 2 different groups, but from the perspective of the 2 different teachers. Maybe you want to focus on 2 different schools. Maybe one school has a certain policy or a certain approach to English language learning, and another school has a different approach. And you want to look at 2 different teachers from those 2 different schools to compare and contrast something. So ask yourself, what are you going to compare and contrast? And this comparing and contrasting, right, relates to similarities and differences. There needs to be, I'm not going to say there needs to be differences and similarities, but there needs to be a good reason to compare and contrast as it relates to your theory, right? What do you want to look at? What's the thing that you want to look at? If you're thinking about communicative strategies of students, you could have one teacher, one group, and compare those students. You could do a case study. In fact, most of these examples that I'm sharing with you are different types of case studies. But you would have a case study where you have one teacher, one group, and you're comparing and contrasting the use of communicative strategies among the students. So the comparison would be more at the level of the student, right? Whereas if you have 2 different teachers, you're comparing more in terms of the teaching techniques, for example. Or in the example of the schools, it's more of a compare and contrast at the level of the school in terms of maybe policy or methodology, etc. All right, so ask yourself, what is the unit of analysis? The unit of analysis is the thing that you're going to compare and contrast. In the example of the communicative strategies, it's the use of communicative strategies. Those strategies are what you're going to compare and contrast. That's going to be your unit of analysis is a communicative strategy, right? How many strategies were used? How were they used? Why were they used? When were they used? With whom were they used? Think of the question words, all about the unit of analysis. I want to present this to you guys now to be thinking about it. Try to use these questions and answer these questions. So when we have our tutoring sessions or you just want to ask a question, then you have a place where you can refer to those questions, and hopefully if I can answer those questions, you can update your notes to make it clear for you within your own context, what the answers are going to be. Now, not everyone's going to have the same unit of analysis. Not everyone's going to choose the same thing to compare and contrast. That's normal. That's how it should be. So don't get confused, right? If your classmates are doing something a little bit different, right? Hopefully you'll come to understand why yours is unique and why you're doing it differently. And of course, if you're not sure, you're saying, well, why am I doing it like this and my other classmates doing it like this? Of course, that's a question that we can have, right? We can discuss that. Okay, but don't think that everyone's going to be doing the same thing. There are going to be aspects of your research that we're all going to do the same thing, and there's going to be some aspects where each of you is going to kind of take your own journey, right? You're going to choose your own participants. You're going to choose your own instruments in many cases, right? And even if you have topics that are very similar, there are going to be some aspects that are going to be different. So just try to keep that in mind. All right, my friends. What else? I think this is what I have here. This is what I want to share with you today in our discussions. I want you guys to obviously continue working and finalizing your theory. We're going to conclude this week, week 6, with Unit 1. And next week, we're going to start Unit 2. And for me personally, the method, like this part of the research is, I think, the most fun, trying to collect the data, really getting into the observations and interviews and really having that contact with the participants. That's for me, it's more fun than the actual theory. But we need to make sure that our theory aligns to our research. Okay, so again, go back to the research questions. Our theory should answer our research questions. That's what the theory does. It's a long answer. It's our long explanation that relates directly to the research questions. The thesis statement is the one-sentence answer to the research questions. If you do that well in the theory, then there's less likelihood that we're going to have problems aligning the theory with your research. Okay, we don't want to have something in our research, in our theory, that we don't address in our own research. Okay, and so again, just keep that in mind. And if you're not sure, if you're looking at some concepts in your theory and you're not sure if it relates to your actual research, then we need to discuss that right away. Or send, ask in the Word document, and I can reply there. Okay, so always keep that in mind as we're beginning now, shifting towards now our own research, collecting our data, and analyzing it, and then later we'll report it. That will be when we come back from our break in May. You're basically going to have about 3 weeks to, you'll have 3 weeks in May plus the 2 weeks in your quote-unquote vacation or break for the last 2 weeks of April. We'll talk about that again. Our next whole group session is going to be April 16th. That's going to be the last day of regular classes before we go on break. and I'll talk about the data analysis. And we'll talk about data analysis on an individual basis in some of our cases, because with qualitative research especially, it's very common to have to analyze a little bit as we go along. So I don't want to get into that because that's going to be very specific to each of your cases. But just know that, if we have to apply a questionnaire first, let's say next week, to determine certain teachers or to learn more from certain teachers to help us decide on which teachers that we want to focus on, then we might have to apply an instrument early on next week and analyze those results and then choose a certain teacher or group of teachers based on how they responded. So if there is some question about your participants, keep that in mind. I want to offer that as a possibility. If you guys are thinking about looking at, let's say, 2 or 3 teachers with specific profiles or characteristics, you can apply a questionnaire. We can work together. You can develop a questionnaire and send it to, let's say, the school who has, 10 teachers, let's say, or 15. And you want to know, you want to look for the best teacher or teachers for your study. Then you could apply the questionnaire and analyze those results, and then from there choose the 1 or 2 or possibly 3 teachers that you want to use for your study. Okay, so sometimes that's necessary if we're not sure really about the teacher or the practice, the teaching practice, or the situation. Okay, keep that in mind. In some cases, that's something that we have to do. Okay. All right, my friends. Wow. Questions, comments, observations, suggestions. What do you think? Anybody?
Hey, teacher.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Related to the literature review that we are going to deliver today, are we going to delete all the comments that you made or that we made in the Word document?
Yes, good question, Miriam. Thank you for asking that. Yes, I'm going to ask everyone, please, to remove all comments. Please remove all extraneous information, like text that was left over from the template. And I'm speaking specifically about the theory section, of course. Okay, so the literature review section. Please remove any notes to yourself. Some of you are highlighting text, and I think all of that is great. Practice. Making notes to yourself and using comments and all of that. But for now, for this assignment, I'm going to ask everyone to remove all of that information. And submit your final draft. Make sure you have your introduction paragraph, your body paragraphs, your thesis statement, of course, at the end of your introduction paragraph. Make sure that you have your transition paragraph at the end. Make sure you have citations within each body paragraph. Make sure you have your references at the end. But yes, please remove all extra information for the final draft. And then as we continue on, I'm going to give everyone a grade. I'm going to give everyone, feedback, individual feedback. And I'm also going to do a Grammarly check. Those 3, a grade, my own observations, my own comments, and Grammarly. Those 3 types of feedback, okay, my expectation will be that you take that information and you continue to make changes to your theory for the final draft that's going to be due May 21st. All right. So, I don't want you to feel stressed, when you receive the grades. I want to be honest with you about what what I think the examiners are going to expect from a final draft. Okay, so I'm grading it as it should be a final draft. Okay, so I'm totally expecting everyone to make changes for a better grade by May 21st. That's what I'm expecting. Okay, so don't think that what you submit today, that's it. Whatever grade you get, that's it, that no changes are going to be, no changes can be made. No, that's not the situation. I'm expecting everyone to change it. Now, if you choose not to change it, then you can expect that grade to be the same. Okay, so if you don't make any changes to your theory between, now and May 21st, and you're happy with the grade that you received, then that's fine. Okay, but I'm expecting everyone to continue to make changes. All right, so yes, please remove all extra information. If you have some comments in the other sections, don't worry about that. Okay, you don't have to remove any extraneous information in the method section or the results and discussion sections, only because we're going to be working on that. But I do recommend that if any of the text that I included in the templates, if you find that useful, then you might want to copy and paste that over to another document and just refer to it as you need to, and then remove it from this working document that we're using. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Miriam, did I answer your question?
Yes, teacher. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
Wait, teacher, just one doubt. How many references do we have to have in total in the whole lit review?
All right. In the template, make sure that you refer, there are 8 points that I listed in the references section at the very bottom of the paper. And there was some confusion with, I think in some of your cases, where to put the references. And some of you were putting the references up right after the theory. Okay. Actually, the references section is at the end of the whole document after your results and discussion section. So look, first of all, I want to, and I'm bringing this up so that all of you can find the section called references from the template, because that's where you'll find a list of 8 points to consider when you're developing it. And one of those points mentions that we need to have at least 8 primary research articles. We need to have, and no more, at least 8, and no more than 2 books in our references, and no web pages, no dictionaries, no encyclopedias, no Wikipedia. So what that means is you need to have at least 10 in total. You need to have at least 10 references. Again, 8 as primary research, and no more than 2. If you have 10 primary research articles, even better. I mean, that's ideal. If you, and those sources also should be in English. Now, if you have some sources in Spanish, that's fine. But number one, make sure that you find out how to list out the references, because when it's a document in a different language, there's a way to do that. And I included an example of that in the APA guide in Notion. There's a SWAY presentation that gives some examples at the very end. In chapter 10, it gives some examples of some of the common references. And one of those is a translated source or reference. And yeah, make sure that you take a look at APA and look at those examples to see that you're including those, in there. But if you have Spanish sources, you need to, the 10 that I'm referring to, the minimum of 10 all need to be in English. Okay, so you need to have at least 8 primary research articles, at least 10 references in total, all in English. If you have Spanish sources or any other language, that's fine, but that's going to be in addition to the minimum of 10 references in English. All righty?
Thank you, teacher.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Any questions?
Yes, teacher, I do.
Yes, go ahead.
In the last part of the transitional paragraph, you mentioned number 4, a closing statement, but I don't know what that is.
Maybe a summarizing sentence. Think of it like kind of just a way to close the paragraph, summarizing the sentence. Maybe the conclusion of the sentence, the main takeaway from, in this case, your study. It's just so that we don't end the paragraph with a question, with our research, with the last research question. So it's really just to kind of summarize the point that you're trying to make, right? You're going to include the problem. You're going to include the thesis statement, reworded, restated. Maybe finish with your final conclusion of the overall purpose of your study. Maybe think of it like that.
Okay, thank you. And regarding APA, 2 days ago you mentioned that only the first word of the title of the source should be in capitalized.
That's correct.
But I don't know about the name of the journal.
Okay, the name of the journal, we're going to capitalize the main words. So we would capitalize, as you normally see it, the main words of the journal. So, yeah, I would capitalize the main words.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, my friends? Any other questions? I highly recommend, as I have recommended from the beginning, and I will continue to recommend until the end of the course. Please use the shared Word online document as often as possible. I understand in some of your cases, maybe broadband is an issue. It's a challenge. Maybe you're not always connected. Maybe it's unstable. And in those cases, I understand that you're going to be working offline. But try to make every effort to go in, as you're making changes to your text, to go in and update the Word document. All right. This is the evidence that that we have together of your progress. Right? If you're working hours and hours and hours and hours and hours in a local document, I'll never know. Right? I'll never know. I'll never see it. Right? So the only way I see it is if you upload it to the shared Word online document. Okay, so please use that shared online document. Either work directly, right? If broadband is not an issue, then I would always go directly into the document and work directly in that document. I am all for you highlighting information, making notes to yourself, making comments off to the side in Word, right? And, I understand it's going to look messy. I get that, and I have no problem with that. The only time I ask that you remove it, obviously, is at the end of when we finish a particular section, like in the case of our theory. Right now, I'm asking everyone to remove that information. But the first 5 weeks or 5.5 weeks, I didn't lose any sleep over you highlighting your text, all of those comments on the side, right? If it was there serving a purpose, if it helped you in the process, that's great. Use it, do it. Okay. Sometimes I don't know, as much as I try to convince some students that it's okay. I don't care if it looks messy at this point and as you're developing your text, as long as I can see what you're doing. And if you have questions, you tell me where to look and I can find what you're asking about, right? And we are having that conversation back and forth. and I can help you with it, right? That's the main thing. I totally get, using those strategies. Those are research strategies, they're writing strategies, they're thinking strategies. And I encourage you to do those things, right? To leave those comments out there in your Word document, in the same document that I'm looking at. I'm not making any judgment on your text until I'm asking for the final product. I mean, judgment in the sense of, of all of the extra information that you include in there. Okay, so you find your process, you find the strategies that work for you, and use those strategies. And again, please use that shared Word Online document, because that's the evidence I have. I can see the revisions. Every time you make a change, it saves the revision. And that's the evidence that I rely on, that you're making progress. And it can only help you. It can only help you to have as many revisions, as much evidence as possible to me of what you're doing. The schedule that I shared with you this morning, right? If you never put any information out there, right, then it's hard for me to help you, right? It's not, I don't know. If we meet and talk about what you're doing and what you're going to do, and there's no record of it in that document, that's a much different conversation than if you keep that schedule up to date, current, and I'm able to go in and look at it anytime, whether it's during our tutoring session or outside of our tutoring session. Anytime you have doubts, you have questions, right? If you ask me a simple question about, well, should I apply a questionnaire on Monday? Well, I can go in. The first thing I'm going to do is go into your schedule. And that's going to provide me a lot of context if it's done well and completed and up to date. That's totally different than not having anything up there. Then I have to ask like 20 questions. Maybe we have to have a conversation. And maybe that takes more time. Whereas if you had completed the spreadsheet, you just post a simple question in your Word document. I go in and I give a simple answer and we're off to the races. So please provide evidence. Please update those schedules. It's not just to give you busy work. And I'm not even grading it directly. I'm not grading the schedule. If you never use it, that's on you. But it helps me understand that the more that you give me, right, the better I feel the feedback I can give you. All right, so please, the Word document, update it frequently, and update the schedule. Now we've got this new schedule, this Excel spreadsheet that I'm encouraging everyone to use. Please update that on a day-to-day basis. Just go in there and add a couple of things and write down what you're working on, what you're planning on developing, what you plan on implementing and actually, applying, right? It's a mixture of what you're doing in terms of your instruments, what you're applying, what you're observing, but also your thought process. What are you working on? You might type in on Monday, developing a teacher questionnaire for this purpose. And then maybe on that Thursday, you say, apply teacher questionnaire. Right? Those are the things that I'm asking that you include in your schedule. And that just helps us work better together, making the best decisions for your particular research purpose. All right, any other questions, guys? No questions? I'm going to pass the list, as they say here in Microsoft Teams. No more questions, comments, suggestions. Please make sure that you're reaching out to me if there are serious issues, like, for example, participants. If you're not sure about participants, you're not sure what to do, at any time, if you're not sure what the next step is to do, please reach out to me, right? The last type of question or conversation I want to have with you guys is when you come into your tutoring session after 2 weeks, because unfortunately our tutoring sessions are only every 2 weeks, and you say, I haven't done anything because I didn't know what to do, right? And 2 weeks have gone by. So I just want to avoid those kinds of conversations, okay? The best way to do that is to reach out and to ask. Now, the last thing I want to say, and I don't know how this is going to work, but I want to try to propose something here, and I'm willing to be flexible here. You guys reach out to me if this makes sense, or if this works for you, or if it doesn't work for you. But here's the thing: the Unit 2 is obviously it's related to collecting the data. And we're going to start with our tutoring sessions on Monday as normal. We're going to continue working as normal in our tutoring sessions. Let me show you my schedule, because maybe you don't, maybe it's hard for you to see my schedule because you only have in your calendar those tutoring sessions, right, that apply to us, right? But if you're looking at my screen here, this is my schedule starting Monday, March 8th. All right, so you can see here I have tutoring sessions scheduled from 8 to 12 on Monday. This is my schedule currently on Tuesday. This is my schedule on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, okay? This is my schedule here. And I'm recording this. You can go back and take a look. This is all of my tutoring sessions. The following week, because we have tutoring sessions every 2 weeks, this is my schedule for the following week starting March 15th through the 19th, okay? Now, here's what I would recommend, because I'm thinking about those cases, for example, Aria, Roberto, Gonzalo, okay? They are scheduled, we're not scheduled to have the next session until the 19th. I don't want them to wait 2 weeks before we have our first conversations, so to speak. They're just starting to think about the collection of their data after 2 weeks have passed. All right, this is the extreme case, all right, for them. But obviously, this applies to everybody. All right, so what can those, especially those in this following week, but everybody that doesn't have a session on Monday, March 8th, what can everybody else do to start to get more involved and more active in what they need to be doing? Okay, and this is what I would suggest. Take note of when I have tutoring sessions. Okay, I've just shared with you my schedule for those 2 weeks. And I'm going to post, and I'm still kind of experimenting with this. I'm still trying to find the best way to do this, but I'm going to be broadcasting live in YouTube when I meet with each of my tutoring sessions. Now, it's going to be unlisted. It's not going to be public, but it's going to be a live broadcast in YouTube, okay, for our purposes. And the reason why I'm doing this is that I want all of you to be, at least to have access. You can choose if you want to listen in on our conversations. And this is part of like the videos. You could always go back to the videos, and you can certainly do that in the videos. But I'm going to try to field questions also in YouTube based on questions that you have, maybe that relate to your sessions. All right, so I'm going to be having conversations with each of you individually, but many of what we talk about, I think if you're listening in and getting some of the feedback that I provide, it will apply in many cases to what you're doing. All right, this is what I have found, right? Many of you are doing very similar types of studies. Many of you are doing qualitative. Some of you are doing mixed methods. But I think you can get a lot out of listening in on these conversations, these tutoring sessions. And again, this is not to put anybody on the spot. It's to open up the conversation so that we're all learning from each other and we're all helping each other. We're going to continue again one-on-one sessions. Okay. I'm not going to open it up to where all of us go into the same sessions, but I want you to have access to the conversations that I have. I will continue trying to record, right, all of our sessions. There were a couple of cases, unfortunately, and this happens. Sometimes technology fails, and I'm not able to get a recording. And for that, in those few cases, I apologize for that. But in most cases, I'm able to get a recording so that you guys can go back not only to hear your own tutoring session, but more importantly, listen in on your classmates. All right. This is really important, especially this first week. I want everyone to be starting to develop from day one, March 8th, on Monday, to start filling out their schedule, their data collection schedule, to start working on the instruments that they need, figuring out what they need to include in their instruments, how they're going to collect the data, be contacting the participants to talk about things like, scheduling and when they can start observing, and start talking about, when they're going to have classes and all of that. Okay. But I really want to stress the importance, especially this first week, next week, March 8th through the 12th, that all of you are either listening in real time, these tutoring sessions, and or the recordings. And I'm going to try to field questions as they come up in real time. So if I'm working with Mariana on Monday, right, I'm having a conversation, I'm going to try to field questions. If someone posts a question in the YouTube live stream, to address those questions along with my discussions with Mariana and so on, with each person. Okay, so I want to try that, see what happens, see if I don't blow up the internet, and we'll see what happens. But the main point here is, for those of you, especially in the second week, but right, and I'm really, thinking of these, those of you who are scheduled at the end of next week, right, to try to get into these sessions earlier on. Now, there's one other thing I need to say also. I have a conference in Inupi, the 18th and 19th. So I need to check my schedule and see exactly what my availability is going to be on these 2 days, on Thursday and Friday, the 18th and 19th of March. For those of you who have scheduled tutoring sessions, okay, in addition to what I'm suggesting that you do, right, in terms of participating and listening in, and of course, you can continue asking me questions outside of your tutoring session. You can post to your Word document and ask questions about that. You can post questions in your Excel spreadsheet, right? Just as you would do in Microsoft Word, you can upload comments in your schedule, in your data collection schedule. All right, so post your questions there. I can go in and answer. In addition to that, those of you who are or have tutoring sessions scheduled for the 18th and 19th, after I confirm my schedule and my availability, I will be posting to those of you for these 2 days to see when we can maybe reschedule if we need to. But let me, this week I need to confirm my schedule and see if changes are necessary. And I will be reaching out to those of you in this group here, in the 18th and 19th. There shouldn't be a problem with the rest of the days here. All right, so that's what I'm thinking about here for the next 2 weeks. Again, trying to get you all exposure to these tutoring sessions and getting your questions answered. That's really the main thing. All right, any final questions, guys? I think we'll pretty much sum it up there. Any final questions? All right, I guess if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and conclude today's whole group session. Again, our next one will be April 17th. Yes, go ahead.
I have like situation. Well, my classmates have a situation.
Mhm.
On March 19th, we're going to have our examen de egreso.
March
So what
19th. Okay.
what happened with my classmates that are going to have the tutoring session?
Okay. And what time is your exam on the 19th?
From 9th to 2 p.m., 3 p.m., something like this.
Okay. So it looks like there will only be 3 of you affected by that. Aria, Roberto, and Gonzalo. And, we can reschedule, and this kind of relates to my situation too. I need to check because I'm going to be attending the conference in Anupi. And so I need to double check my availability when I'm going to be. I'm thinking I'm going to need to reschedule all of these probably. But I'll tell you what, for those of you who are who have tutoring sessions on the 19th, we can reschedule them. We can either reschedule them later in the day on Friday, or let me see here. Let me double check here. I'm not sure. Yeah, I've got a Nupi on Saturday too. All right, so for Friday, we can reschedule. I don't know if Adia and Roberto and Gonzalo are here right now.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes.
If for those of you who have your tutoring session scheduled on the 19th, if you guys are having your exam until 2, I don't have a problem rescheduling the 3 of you starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But I don't know if you, just for this week, just for the week of the 15th through the 19th, is that okay with you guys or not? Are you available?
Yes, it's good by me.
So Adia, we would do Adia's at... Go ahead.
Sorry, nah, it's okay with me too.
Hey, Gonzalo?
Yes, no problem.
All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this change right now. That'll take care of Friday. And we will start at 4 p.m. with Adia. And Roberto, we will do 4:30. And Gonzalo at 5. Just for that week. All right, I'm gonna leave it at that, but I still need to confirm my schedule. I don't think that'll be a problem, but let me double check if it. Let me. Okay. I will confirm with everyone who has a tutoring session on the 18th and 19th. If you guys give me a chance this week or next week to double check with when I'm going to present and I need to attend as well some of the talks, but I will confirm with everyone. But yeah, either way, I will make arrangements to reschedule in some way with each of you. But do please, especially you guys that are scheduled these 2 days, really try to get into some of the tutoring sessions that first week so that you can start making progress. And again, anybody can ask questions, anytime in your schedules, in your, in your Excel spreadsheet data collection schedules, as they come up. And if there's instruments that you want me to look at, you can let me know and I can, send them to me and I'll take a look at them. Okay. Any other questions, guys? No? All right. I think we'll stop there then. We'll continue on Monday then and start working on our data collection. Try to finish up for today, obviously, your theory. And as soon as I get your final documents on Saturday, I'll start looking at those and getting back to you and with my feedback. All right, guys, we'll stop there. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you guys starting next week as we begin Unit 2 with the method section. All right, guys, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you.